In May 1940, 400,000 soldiers stood trapped on a single beach in France, surrounded on three sides by the German army, and the only way home was across a sea that, technically, none of them had the ships to cross. This is the true story of what happened next when an entire nation of ordinary people, in fishing boats, pleasure yachts, and river ferries, sailed directly into a war zone to bring their army home. To understand how this happened, look at the map. It's May 1940. Germany has just invaded France and the Low Countries, and their army is advancing far faster than anyone expected. British, French, and Belgian forces, over 1/3 men, find themselves being pushed steadily backward toward the coast into a shrinking pocket of land with nowhere left to go. By late May, the Allied forces are compressed into a narrow strip of territory around a single port town, Dunkirk. To the east and south, the German army. To the north, the sea. There is exactly one way out, and it isn't a road. It's the English Channel, roughly 34 miles of open water separating Dunkirk from the safety of the English coast. This wasn't a small tactical problem. The British Expeditionary Force was Britain's only trained, equipped army. If it was destroyed or captured at Dunkirk, Britain would have almost no way to defend itself from a future German invasion. Winston Churchill, who had become Prime Minister only 2 weeks earlier, understood the stakes immediately. This wasn't just about saving soldiers. It was about whether Britain could continue the war at all. On the beaches at Dunkirk, conditions were desperate. Soldiers stood in long lines, stretching out into the shallow water, waiting for any available ship. German aircraft attacked repeatedly. There weren't nearly enough naval vessels to evacuate everyone in time. Military planners initially estimated they might be able to save perhaps 45,000 men, out of nearly 400,000. With not enough naval ships available, the British Admiralty made an unprecedented decision. They put out a call through radio, through harbor offices, through word of mouth, asking private citizens with boats of almost any kind to bring them to a collection point on the English coast. Fishing trawlers, pleasure yachts, river ferries, lifeboats. If it could float and carry people, they wanted it. What happened next surprised even the military planners. Hundreds of ordinary civilians volunteered immediately, many with no naval experience, no weapons, and no real protection from German aircraft. Fishermen, weekend sailors, retired ferrymen, some were in their 60s. None of them were ordered to go. They simply went between May 26th and June 4th, 1940. What became known as the Little Ships of Dunkirk, around 700 small civilian vessels joined naval ships in crossing the channel, again and again, into an active combat zone to bring soldiers home. But getting the soldiers onto these boats was its own kind of impossible. These weren't safe waters. German aircraft strafed the beaches and the boats themselves. German U-boats and fast attack craft operated in the channel. Many of the small boats had no radio, no weapons, and no armor, just a hull, an engine, and a civilian willing to keep going back. Because the water near the beach was too shallow for larger vessels, many small boats worked in relay ferrying soldiers from the beach out to bigger ships waiting in deeper water, then returning for more. Some boats made this same short, dangerous trip a dozen times or more in a single day. Soldiers who had spent days without food or sleep waded into the water, sometimes shoulder deep, just to reach them. Among the hundreds of small boats was a pleasure yacht called the Sundowner, owned by a retired naval officer named Charles Lightoller, a man who, decades earlier, had survived the sinking of the Titanic as its most senior surviving officer. Now in his 60s, Lightoller sailed the Sundowner to Dunkirk himself, along with his son and a young Sea Scout. Designed to carry perhaps 20 people, the Sundowner returned to England carrying 130 soldiers on board. Day by day, the operation that was expected to save perhaps 45,000 men began pulling out far more. By the end of the 9-day operation, over 338,000 soldiers, British, French, and Belgian, had been evacuated from Dunkirk. It remains one of the largest military evacuations in history. When Churchill addressed Parliament shortly after, he was careful not to call Dunkirk a victory. He famously said that wars are not won by evacuations, but he also understood what had actually been saved, not just an army, but Britain's ability to keep fighting at all. Without Dunkirk, there may have been no force left to eventually help win the war years later. The evacuation wasn't without heavy losses. Thousands of soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured during the retreat and the evacuation itself. Thousands more remained behind, fighting rearguard actions to buy time for others to escape, many of them knowing they themselves would not be rescued. 39 of the little ships were lost in the crossing. Many of the little ships that survived Dunkirk returned quietly to ordinary civilian life, back to fishing, back to weekend sailing, back to ferrying passengers along English rivers. Their owners, for the most part, didn't consider themselves heroes. They said simply that soldiers needed help, and they had a boat. Today, some of the original little ships still exist restored and maintained by owners and historical associations, some of whom make the crossing to Dunkirk every few years in commemoration, following the same route across the same 34 miles of water. What makes Dunkirk remarkable isn't just the number of men saved, it's who saved them. Not an elite unit, not a secret weapon. Ordinary people in ordinary boats, deciding that a government's problem was also theirs to solve and simply showing up again and again until the job was done. In 9 days, in May and June of 1940, hundreds of ordinary civilians crossed one of the most dangerous stretches of water in the world, not because they were ordered to, but because they chose to. They didn't turn the tide of the war by themselves, but they made sure there was still an army left to eventually do it. The map shows 34 miles of water. It doesn't show how many times ordinary people were willing to cross it.